Everyone, it's Deltron Live, and today we're going to continue our map making tutorial with the StarCraft 2 editor. So last time we finished up the terrain module, so today we're going to start looking at the trigger module and learning how to use triggers. So in this tutorial, we're just going to cover the first page of this tutorial. So let's get started. So you can see it's just saying that if you haven't completed part 1 of this tutorial yet, which was the terrain module, you can find it here. So we did that. Okay, so objective. So the objective of this tutorial is going to learn how to use the trigger module by creating triggers to handle victory, defeat, and scripted in-game events. So I would go ahead and download the trigger module fleshed out terrain map file. So it looks like the person that made this tutorial added a bunch of things to the map. So go ahead and download this middle file and save it in the same folder where you save the first terrain module map. So the end result we're going for with this tutorial, here's some screenshots. You can see some units fighting an Ultralisk. And then we have a cinematic here that we're also going to create. So we're going to be able to play through a short adventure style mission with our heroes investigating the mystery of who has been smashing and eating the local colony's crops on Agria. Well, it looks like it's going to be this Ultralisk that we're going to have to fight. So a brief introduction on triggers. So the trigger module is where the gameplay and storytelling happens. It is where you create in-game cinematics, spawn in units mid-game, and create and track objectives, and much, much more. So triggers can be thought of at the basic level as a set of instructions. When you want something to happen during the game, you use a trigger to tell the game when you want that to happen and exactly how you want it to happen. So there's several actions that make up triggers. First, you have events. So an event is what causes the trigger to run. So if you want to set up a trigger to end the game when the hero dies, then the event for that trigger would be when a unit dies. And then you have conditions. So conditions make sure that a trigger only runs when a certain circumstances are true. In the example above, when the trigger runs because a unit has died, we would add a condition to make sure that the unit that died was a hero. Then actions. So actions are just the instructions that are carried out when the trigger is run. In our example, the action would run when a hero dies is game over for player 1. So basically what this is saying, the event is, if you know programming, it's kind of like an if-then statement. Events are the if statement. So if this is true, if a unit dies, then the action occurs, which would end in defeat. And then conditions are just the variables making sure like that the unit that has died is the hero unit. Okay. So before we get started, so we're going to continue using the map that we worked on in part 1. So we're actually going to use the map that we just downloaded, which I talked about earlier in this video. So it's just saying they added things to the map that we finished in the terrain module. Okay, so let's get started. So let's go into your StarCraft 2 maps folder and then download the trigger module fleshed out terrain SC2 map. So just open that up. Just waiting for it to open. Okay, there you go. So you can see, yeah, they definitely added a lot of stuff. So it's nice they gave us this finished map to use. Okay, so it's just saying they added several key areas. So you can see this is one of the key areas. This is a small colony. These are the poor people whose crops have been destroyed. Okay, they also added a destroyed farmland section with an Ultralisk. So killing this Ultralisk is one of the objectives of our map. And they also added an optional area just to the north of the crops, so with some burrowed Zerg units. And then lastly, they scatter some Zerg units around the map for the player to interact with, which you can see here. Okay, so setting up view options. So go ahead and open up the trigger module. So the trigger module button are these gears, or you can just press F6. Okay. So before we dive into triggers, you want to take a quick look at the different ways to set up the trigger module. So there's two options that we'll set specifically, although you can feel free to look around at your own leisure. So the first one shows subviews. The trigger window contains a list of all the triggers on the map, which is the section on the left. So this is the trigger window. There is a melee initialization trigger already created on the map by default. If you want to modify any of the events, conditions, or triggers, actions in the trigger, you have to double click on the item to bring up a window. We can edit the event, condition, or action. However, if we turn on subviews, then when we single click an item to select it, its contents will be shown in an additional section that shows up below the trigger contents. So to toggle subview options, press the Use Subview button on the toolbar at the top of the window. So that's basically showing, this is the subview. So if it's not clicked, you'll see that there's no subview window on the bottom. If it is selected, you see that this appears. So if you select one of these, it'll show these at the bottom. If not, you'll have to double click this and then go into a separate window. So basically just saying, use subviews, have this selected all the time. Okay. Hide libraries, which is this button here. So all the events, conditions, and actions in StarCraft 2 are contained with the trigger libraries. You can create your own trigger library for this map, however, we do not need to create any, so we're just going to hide them. To toggle the trigger libraries, press the Show Libraries button on the toolbar next to the Use Subviews button. Okay, so we don't want that selected, so we're just going to keep that unselected. So there's many more options that can be found in the View menu at the top of the window. But for this tutorial, we're not going to use them, but feel free to take the time to look at them in your own time. So my first trigger, victory and defeat triggers. So let's make some triggers. The first two that we will make will be simple victory and defeat triggers that run when the player kills the Ultralisk and Nidus Worm and when the player's unit dies, respectively. So we're going to create a victory trigger when they kill the Ultralisk and Nidus Worm, and when the Jim Raynor unit dies, it's going to end in defeat. So before we do that, we need to delete the melee initialization trigger. This just contains actions for melee maps. So since we're doing our own custom map, we don't need any of the melee map initializations, which just has triggers for units harvesting minerals or construction buildings and stuff like that. So just delete this, right click, and clear. Or just press the delete key. So first we're going to create the delete trigger. So this is going to run when our hero dies. So to create a new trigger, so right click on the trigger list, go new trigger. There's also shortcuts. You can see it was Control-T for that. And then we're going to name this defeat. Okay, just press enter. And then select the trigger. It's selected to show its contents. So contents are shown here. So this is a trigger list window, trigger contents, and this is the subview. So creating a new event. To add a new event to the trigger, right click, events label, and select new event. Okay. So right click the events, new event. Okay. From the window that pops up, select unit dies. So just search unit dies, select it. Okay. So now creating a new condition. Okay, so just right click on the trigger contents, new condition. Okay, the window that pops up contains a list of all condition types. So select the comparison condition type and press OK. And you'll see that it automatically puts it below in the conditions subsection. Okay, we're choosing comparison because we want to compare the unit that died with our hero Jim Raynor unit. If they're the same, then the condition is true, and then the condition's action will be carried out, causing a defeat. So with the conditions you just created selected, okay, you can see its contents in the subsection view. There should be a value 1, operator, and value 2 fields. So double click on the value 1 field, and this brings up a list of conditions to choose from, and then select triggering unit. So just go ahead and type that in. Press OK. So the triggering unit refers to the specific unit that caused the trigger to run. In this case, the triggering unit is a unit that died. The operator field is where we're going to select how we expect the two values of the condition to relate to each other. Okay, so how we're going to relate value 1 to value 2. So in this case, there's only two options: equal to, which is the two equal signs, or not equal to, which is the exclamation mark with the equal sign to the right. Because the two units we're comparing are either the same, which is the two equal signs, or they are not, which is the exclamation mark and the equal sign to the right. So just like in programming, there is no kind of the same value. We're going to leave the operator as the equal to, because we want the trigger to run when the unit that died is the hero unit. So double click on value 2, and that brings up the condition list again. So this time we aren't going to select a condition from the list. Instead, just above the list, there's a row of radio buttons that controls what type of condition value you can choose from. So it's saying that you're supposed to be looking at the condition function, but instead you want to click on the value radio button. And this brings up a list of units that exist on the map. So whenever we made the map terrain and placed down units for player 1, we placed those two Marines and a Jim Raynor commando unit. So find the Jim Raynor commando unit and select them. Okay. Here there's no search button. You can just type Jim, it'll show up. Select it and press OK. So now we're going to create a new action. So right click in the trigger contents list and select new action. Okay, so from the list, find and select end game for player. Okay, so just type end game for player, select it, okay. So select the action, and it'll show its contents in the subsection view. So we want to double click on the type field, and then change it from victory to defeat, because we want the game to end in defeat when the Jim Raynor has died. So now test it. So let's jump into the game and test our new trigger. So make sure you save first, file save, and then just press this test document button. So it's going to take a second to load. I apologize if the in-game sound is a little loud, but basically it's just wanting us to kill.
That lady's about to sing.
This better be good.
Kill our Jim Raynor unit.
Break it down. Raiders roll.
Let me go ahead and turn the sound down a little bit. Okay.
Talk to me. Sell me.
This might take a little while.
By the numbers.
He has a lot of health.
Armed and ready. You gonna give me orders?
What's up? What's the plan? Time to man up.
Armed
Okay,
and ready.
let's move him. And so he's about to die, and this should end in defeat if we did everything correctly. There we go. Okay, just quit out. Okay, and then just Alt-Tab back to your triggers module, your editor. Okay, so now we're going to set up the victory trigger. So this will end the game in victory for player 1 when both the Nidus Worm and Ultralisk units are dead. Okay, so it's just saying if you haven't placed, go ahead and place them. But we have them placed already. So before we make the trigger, we need to create two variables, one for each of the units, the Nidus Worm and the Ultralisk. So variables. So variables, they work the same way that they do in scripting and coding languages. I know to use the editor, you don't have to know any programming, although it does help some. I do know programming. I know C++. I use it for my work every once in a while, but I'll go ahead and read through this. So a variable is basically an identifier that can be set to some values. It's just like in math. So for example, if the letter A is our variable, then we can say A equals 5. So then you can use A in an equation, just like you're using the number 5. So A plus 2 would equal 7. Since A is 5, 5 plus 2 is 7. You can also change the value in that variable at any time. So we can replace A equal to 5 with A equal to 6 after we complete the A plus 2 equation. So whenever you use the variable A, it's going to be 6 instead of 5. So basically, the variable A will stay the same to whatever value you set it as until you change it further down in your program or whatever. You can create as many types of variables as you want, such as units, integers. Integers are just numbers, like whole numbers, and then text. So to make a variable in the trigger module, so right click in the trigger list, okay, and then a new variable, and name it Nidus Worm. Okay, press enter. So after you select the variable, you see its contents on the right. Each variable has a type. So we're going to change this type of variable. We want it to be unit. Okay. It needs to be unit because we want it to be the Nidus Worm unit. So double click on the initial value field and then select the value radio button and then search for the Nidus Worm and press OK. Okay, and there you created your first variable. So now we're going to do the same thing with an Ultralisk. So new variable, name it Ultralisk, enter, unit, value, Ultralisk. Okay. So now we're ready to make the victory trigger. So go ahead and make the trigger now. So remember, just in the trigger window, new trigger, and call this victory. Okay, so it's saying the last trigger, which is the defeat trigger, we had an event that ran every time a unit died. This time we're going to use an event called periodic event to make the trigger run at repeating intervals. So it's constantly checking to see if we kill the Ultralisk and Nidus Worm every so seconds that we're going to define. So right click in the trigger area and select new event, and then select periodic event from the function. So just search periodic. Okay. So change the duration value from 5 to 1. So I'm guessing that checks every second. And then leave the time type as game time. So it's checking every 1 second in of game time. Exactly. So we need to create two conditions, one for the Ultralisk and one for the Nidus Worm. So right click in the trigger area and select new condition. Select comparison. Press OK. So select the new condition to view its contents in the subview section, which is here. Change value 1 to unit is alive. Okay. And then change the unit value to the Nidus Worm variable we created. So just click here, unit, variable, and then you should have the Nidus Worm variable that you created here. Press OK. And then double click value 2. Make sure the true checkbox is unchecked, and then press OK. So that basically sets value 2 to false, because we want this trigger to run when the units are not alive. So basically it's checking if the Nidus Worm is dead, it's not alive, so false, as well as the Ultralisk one that we're going to make soon, it'll end in victory. But as long as the unit is alive, it will not end in victory. Okay, so it's basically saying repeat the last few steps for the Ultralisk. You can basically, since it's the rest, you want to create the same trigger except for the Ultralisk to check if the Ultralisk is alive or not. So basically, since it's going to be this pretty much the same as the Nidus Worm, you can just select the Nidus Worm, Control C, copy it, Control V, and then the only thing we need to change is the unit type, and then variable Ultralisk. Okay. So since we have two conditions for the trigger action only runs if both conditions are true, since we set it to equal to. So if you wanted to run the trigger when either one of the two conditions, so either the Nidus Worm or Ultralisk is dead, you can add an or condition, and then create conditions inside of the or condition. So this will make it so that any of the conditions inside the or conditions are true, the whole thing is true, and the trigger will run. But in our case, we want both of the Nidus and Ultralisk units to die in order to win the mission, so we're not going to be using an or condition. So now we need to create another end game for player action like we did for our last trigger, but just have it end at victory this time instead of defeat. So basically, just right click in the trigger area, new action, and then we want end game for player. Okay. And then it should be default to victory. Okay. So now we're going to create folders. This is the last part of this tutorial video. So folders are used to keep our triggers organized. So we're going to create a folder in the trigger list and then drag and drop our victory, defeat, and variables into it. So just right click in the trigger list, new folder. We're going to call this folder victory / defeat. Okay, and then just drag the triggers and variables into that folder. And now you can see that it's a little more organized. You can open, hide, and show the folder contents. So you want to do this because it just organizes your triggers. Right now we only have 2 triggers and 2 variables, but as we go through on with this tutorial, we're going to create several folders to group different triggers. So right now we just have the victory and defeat triggers. We're going to create gameplay triggers, objective triggers, as well as others. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thanks everyone for watching. Please, if you have any suggestions, please leave, and how I can improve or anything, just leave a comment down below. And yeah, thanks for taking your time to watch this. I hope it's helpful, and take it easy. All right, bye everyone.